The smartphone chimed, dutifully announcing an incoming message. The red-haired woman, about to slice an avocado, glanced at the screen and read 2 short sentences from her husband. "Willa, I'll be late. Have dinner without me." With a sigh, the woman set the exotic fruit aside. Her desire to treat her husband to a dish of his beloved avocado and shrimp for dinner vanished, and her appetite disappeared with it. The investigative curiosity to test a new salad recipe for the upcoming holidays evaporated as if it had never existed. Tomorrow was already the 7th anniversary of her fateful meeting with Barry, and the end of the month would bring the new year. Willa felt a wave of sadness. Unfortunately, such messages had become routine, making her wonder if Barry had strayed and was now involved with a mistress. Why else would she, his lawful wife, have to dine alone almost every night for the past 6 months, with only the hum of the laptop for company? Trying to distract herself while waiting for her husband, Willa decided to prepare for the upcoming holiday. After all, a gloomy mood wouldn't improve on its own. She needed to try to lift her spirits. She didn't feel like doing a thorough cleaning, so she left that task for the weekend. But why not start creating a festive atmosphere right now? For instance, she could inventory the holiday decorations. Over 7 years of marriage, they had established a tradition of decorating the apartment together, but who knew when Barry would find the time? The boxes with decorations and a small but beautiful artificial tree were stored in a cabinet on the balcony. Soon after their wedding and moving into Willa's mother's apartment, Barry had set up a makeshift office and workshop there. However, Willa could count on one hand the times her husband had worked there. More often he would sit in a comfortable chair in front of his laptop, browsing the internet or playing games. Lately, though, the improvised office, like his lawful wife, had been left alone by him more frequently. Barry would come home very late, have dinner and go straight to bed. Willa shook her head to dispel the sad thoughts, tied her hair back and began her task. She decided to leave the tree for later and focus on sorting through the ornaments. Many of them were old, dating back to her childhood, and although she had packed them carefully, some were inevitably lost or broken. She carefully lifted a plywood box adorned with red exclamation marks, a warning her father had painted to remind everyone to handle the fragile contents with care. A pang of sadness struck her. Her father had been so thoughtful, yet he had shattered their family. Willa was 15 and her younger sister Phoebe was 14 when their father announced he was leaving their mother for another woman. The news was devastating, especially since the other woman, Justina, had been a family friend. Justina and their father had been classmates and worked together at the same company. He would often give Justina rides to and from work, a convenience that eventually led to an affair. Justina's frequent visits to their home under the guise of friendship had been a ruse to conceal her true intentions. The betrayal left Willa's mother, Doris, heartbroken and embittered. She refused to hear anything about her ex-husband and his new partner, and her anger extended to all men. Doris would often stand motionless in the kitchen or another room, staring into space and silently moving her lips, as if engaged in an endless, silent conversation. She had discarded all reminders of her former husband, except for this box, which held some of the glass ornaments. Over the years their number had dwindled, but the real loss was her mother's faith in men. Willa remembered her mother's constant warnings never to trust anyone completely, not even a husband. Doris's advice had shaped Willa's own views on relationships, making her wary and guarded. As she sorted through the ornaments, she couldn't help but reflect on her own marriage and the growing distance between her and Barry. The festive preparations were a welcome distraction, but they couldn't erase the lingering doubts and sadness. And do not befriend women to avoid a treacherous stab in the back. Moreover, you should always have a secret stash that your spouse knows nothing about. Then to Doris's great displeasure. As soon as Phoebe turned 18, she moved in with her boyfriend. The scandal was monumental. Willa even shuddered, recalling how her mother had shouted at her younger sister, predicting that she would be used and discarded. Phoebe countered that a marriage certificate was no guarantee of happiness, and that when love fades in a relationship, nothing can stop a straying husband. Doris, taken aback by her daughter's sharp retort, lost all restraint, and an ugly family quarrel ensued. Phoebe left, and contrary to her mother's grim predictions, she found happiness with her partner, although they didn't rush to formalize their union. Communication with her younger daughter almost ceased for a while, as Doris considered her a traitor. Willa spoke to her mother often, trying to soften her stance, and gradually Doris began to relent. However, the process was slow, until a greater misfortune struck, one more severe than her daughter's leaving. Upon learning of her dire diagnosis, Doris desperately sought to mend her relationship with Phoebe. Naturally, the primary burden fell on Willa, but her younger sister also supported their mother as best she could, passing on and transferring large sums to her elder sister. Doris, despite her pain, tried to stay strong, and on one of the rare days when she felt well enough, she packed everything that reminded her of her unfaithful husband into bags and asked Willa to throw them into the dumpsters. The only thing she spared was a box of toys, a remnant of a happier past. In their conversations, the sisters agreed that the stresses Doris had endured played a significant role in her illness. 10 years ago, the disease had retreated under the pressure of treatment and her daughter's support. However, by the time Willa was preparing to meet Barry, the illness had returned. Weakened, Doris tried to dissuade her from this step. Her main objection to Barry was his appearance. "Oh, my dear, why this dandy? A handsome husband is always a risk of being left alone with children, and that's not even the worst outcome. It would be far sadder to end up with a broken heart. But don't rush into having children. Take your time and observe Barry more closely. He's too flashy. Women will be lining up to steal him away." This time Phoebe agreed with their mother and advised, "Willa, make sure that in case of a divorce, this fancy man gets nothing. I, for one, live with my partner without a marriage certificate, for practical reasons." When Doris realized that Willa was determined to marry Barry, she did not argue or cause a scene. Firstly, she lacked the strength due to her illness. Secondly, she feared a repeat of the estrangement she had experienced with her younger daughter. Rationally, Doris understood there might not be time for reconciliation, so she soon asked Willa, "Forgive me, dear, for my grumbling. You understand, once bitten, twice shy. Marry your Barry and be happy. I just have one request. Live with me here, in this apartment. I don't have much time left." Willa tried to persuade her mother otherwise, but despite nodding in response to her daughter's arguments, a deep sadness lingered in Doris's eyes. Despite all efforts, Doris could not overcome the recurrence of her illness. After a year and a half of struggle, she passed away. Throughout this difficult period, Barry showed no sign of dissatisfaction with his wife, who was constantly by her ailing mother's side. Unlike Robert, Phoebe's partner, who never once visited Doris, Willa's husband was always ready to help. He assisted in taking Doris to her treatments and proved to be a true support for his wife and sister-in-law. When the battle with the illness was lost, it was Barry who handled all the formalities and arranged Doris's funeral. Robert also proved useful. The athletic man tactfully but firmly removed Doris's ex-husband and Justina, who had somehow learned of Doris's passing, from the memorial service. However, another strange incident occurred that sad day. Immediately after the wake, Willa's mother-in-law, settling on the couch in her daughter-in-law's apartment, began talking about planning for a child now that the inheritance process was underway. The second room is now free, and there are no more obstacles to having a baby, although it would be even better to sell this apartment and find a place in a better neighbourhood." Shocked, Willa remained silent, though she was not usually timid. She felt a strong urge to send her rude mother-in-law away, but Barry, sensing her mood, changed the subject. However, Mrs. Kearns did not relinquish her ideas and frequently commented on the unfortunate neighbourhood where her daughter-in-law's apartment was located. Willa confided in her sister, and Phoebe offered sage advice. "Selling this apartment and buying a new one is unwise, especially since your mother-in-law's arguments are weak. This is a decent neighbourhood. There's a park nearby, and the transportation is excellent. Moreover, there's a kindergarten and school close by. But that's not the most important thing. New housing would be jointly owned property, and in the divorce, you would have to divide it." "Why are you talking about such sad things, Phoebe? Barry gives me no reason to think about divorce." "It's great, but don't forget about your own interests. Take my Robert, for example. Once confessed that his father made him swear never to formalise the marriage, so their family wouldn't lose money and property." Willa was shocked by her sister's revelations and asked, "How could you continue to live with Robert and communicate with his relatives after such a confession?" "Oh, I wanted to be offended and leave him proudly, but then, after thinking and consulting legal forums, I realised that I love him so much that I can tolerate his father's foolish vow. Robert understands that it hurts me to be in the role of a cohabitant and tries to compensate. Gifts don't have to be returned in case of breakup, so he formalised a gift agreement for a car and constantly buys me jewellery. Returning to your scheming mother-in-law, blame everything on me. I won't give up what's mine. I have a legitimate half share here, and I won't sell it below market value. That way, you can more easily deal with your mother-in-law and you won't be involved. I can handle her disapproving looks a couple of times a year." Reflecting on unhappy memories, Willa carefully examined the fragile Christmas decorations and was glad she hadn't lost any more. She convinced herself that this was a good sign that all was well in her family. But reason protested. In the past, Willa hadn't believed her mother's sad predictions about men's infidelity or her sister's warnings. But what should she do now? There were more signs that Barry had found love elsewhere. Were her mother and Phoebe right in predicting a sad end to her seemingly eternal love story? Would she have to endure the bitterness of betrayal? Had Barry also been seduced by romantic affairs on the side? What had she and countless other women done wrong? Had they been too caring or not warm enough? Pondering this complex and painful topic, Willa set the box aside and began to unpack a large garland. She accidentally knocked over another box, which fell and opened. Among the scattered ornaments, she noticed a gift bag with something inside. After a moment's hesitation, Willa decided to satisfy her curiosity. She opened the package and found a small postcard inscribed, "To my beloved," and a box containing a costly smartphone. Willa felt warmth and lightness in her heart. Her suspicions of her husband's infidelity were unfounded. Barry had noticed the problems with her old smartphone and decided to give her a useful gift. Perhaps not for New Year's, but earlier, maybe for the anniversary of their first meeting. Willa carefully returned the gift bag and box with tree ornaments to their places, so her husband wouldn't suspect she had discovered her surprise. She hurried to the kitchen, determined not to let Barry know she had found out about his gift. But she could still pamper him as planned. Anticipating the joy, she reflected that things are not always as they seem at first glance. Perhaps Barry's budget had been strained by the purchase of the expensive smartphone, forcing him to work overtime. That would explain his late arrivals home. She had imagined the worst, but now she understood the truth. Inspired by the prospect of trying a new recipe, The woman imagined her husband's joy and anticipated a pleasant family dinner. Barry returned home close to midnight and, after spending about 15 minutes in the bathroom, finally appeared in the kitchen. She served him a beautifully arranged salad and put the mashed potatoes and cutlet in the microwave to warm. However, Barry's reaction to the meal caught her completely off guard. After quickly eating almost half of his dinner, he looked at her and began to complain. "Could you have made a more economical meal?" "What? Isn't it tasty?" Willa asked with a surprise, preoccupied with the thought that she needed to play the surprised face when she received the smartphone. "It's delicious, but shrimp and avocado are expensive, especially for an ordinary dinner, not a special occasion. I think you've been spending too much on food lately." He continued eating, but soon resumed his complaints, as Willa placed a box of large pastries on the table. "You definitely should bake at home, it's cheaper. I have a rough idea of how much all this costs. For the price of these 4 tiny pastries, you could probably bake a kilogram of decent cookies." "What do you think, that you married a money bag?" "These are bourgeois habits. Buying pastries from bakeries where they add all sorts of genetically modified products. We're practically flushing all our earnings down the toilet now, and in the future we'll be supporting pharmaceutical companies because of your laziness and extravagance." Willa didn't take his grumbling seriously and even admired how skillfully he feigned sternness. Remembering the gift she had found, she was pleasantly anticipating exploring and setting up her new smartphone, and decided to play along with Barry's act. With a touch of exaggeration, Willa exclaimed, "You're so thrifty. With you, we have nothing to fear from financial crises." Willa wondered when Barry would give her the gift, but hoped he would save the anniversary celebration for the following evening. The fishing tools she had prepared for him now seemed insignificant, and she wanted to compliment them with a special dinner. As she pondered what to do to treat her husband properly, Barry reached the peak of his complaints and demanded, "You know what, Willa? From now on, start collecting receipts for all your purchases, and then say once a week we'll sit down together and analyse what you bought impulsively and what we could have done without. With your approach, we'll be stuck in this tiny apartment forever. If you didn't spend so much on food, we could have improved our living conditions by now." Willa grimaced. Over the past year and a half, the topic of buying a new apartment had come up almost daily, and although she knew the initiative came from her mother-in-law rather than her husband, her irritation grew. However, she didn't want to argue on the eve of their special evening, so she simply cleared the dirty dishes from the table and, kissing her husband, murmured, "In a few minutes it will be the anniversary of our first meeting, and now I'm going to bed, hoping you'll join me soon." Barry seemed taken aback by her response and replied hesitantly, Yes, you go ahead. I'll finish my tea. The pastry is too good to resist." Willa, wearing a beautiful nightgown, hoped her husband would join her in the bedroom soon, but she fell asleep waiting. In the morning, seeing the dirty coffee cup and plate with crumbs on the kitchen table, she realised Barry had already left for work. The unpleasant conversation about excessive spending now seemed trivial, and at work, anticipating a pleasant evening, Willa tried not to daydream, but struggled to focus. Fortunately, there wasn't much work at the atelier, and she meticulously planned their celebration for 2. She smiled, recalling how sternly Barry had scolded her for spending too much on food, and decided to treat him again. She wanted to reward him for the generous gift he was about to give her. For Willa, the value of the smartphone, or its prestige, was less important than the sentiment behind her husband's gift. For romantic dinner, she decided not to overthink too much and buy trout steaks to bake with vegetables. Eagerly awaiting her lunch break, she hurried to the central market, despite the high prices, because the selection was better than at the nearest supermarket. Fortunately, the market was only 5 stops away from work, easily manageable during her lunch break. As she returned to the atelier with her purchases, the bus she was riding suddenly broke down midway. Assessing the number of passengers at the nearby stops and the time left in her lunch break, Willa decided not to wait for public transport and called a taxi. However, as if by Murphy's Law, her smartphone suddenly froze. Encouraging herself with the thought that she would have a new reliable device that very evening, she rushed back to work on foot. Taking a shortcut through the central street, she suddenly noticed her husband's silhouette in the large window of a prestigious bakery, tucked away in a quiet, cosy spot. Willa was about to dash inside to say hello, but froze in her tracks. Barry was enjoying pastries with a blonde woman with a stylish haircut. On the table in front of the stranger lay a gift bag that Willa had seen just the day before. Perhaps it could have been a coincidence, but the blonde was also holding a brand new smartphone and saying something admiringly to Barry. "Why are you standing in the middle of the street like a statue?" A disgruntled male voice interrupted her thoughts. Someone chuckled behind her. "Frozen, are you, snow maiden?" A rough hand nudged Willa, but she paid no attention and continued watching her husband and the blonde woman. They were engaged in a lively conversation. The stranger was showing something to Barry on her device's screen and laughing at his words. Willa didn't know what to do. She feared that entering the cafe would make her look foolish or lead to an irreparable scene. However, standing outside, waiting for her husband to finish his rendezvous, was almost unbearable. Suddenly, Willa's smartphone, which had been silent, buzzed loudly, jolting her from her thoughts. Her boss's displeased voice came through. "Are you planning to return to work at all? Your client is already waiting." Willa glanced at the screen. She still had 10 minutes left of her lunch break. But her strict boss seemed unconcerned with such details and loudly ordered, "Get back to work! The sooner you return, the better." Then, lowering her voice, presumably so the client wouldn't hear, she added more kindly, "Willa, she is principal where my little rascal studies. You know I always reciprocate." The distressed Willa even managed a smile. Yes, her boss could be overly stern, especially with clients, but she genuinely supported her employees. Besides, continuing to stand outside, watching Barry's peaceful conversation with some blonde was pointless and even dangerous. Her nerves might not hold, leading to unpredictable consequences. So Willa replied without argument, "All right, I'll be there in 5 minutes." She cast one last glance at her husband in the cafe and hurried back to work. Despite life's dramas, Willa strove to remain professional. Her beloved work was one of the anchors, keeping her relatively stable and preventing her from spiralling into despair. As she discussed order details with a client, she tried to push thoughts of Barry's strange meeting with the unknown woman out of her mind. But it was nearly impossible. She noted the client's preferences, changed the initial specification, and then heard an unpleasant, shrill voice. "Hey, are you even listening to me? What are you scribbling there? Sleeves with ruffles, not a neckline. This is outrageous. Stop daydreaming and write everything down as I say, not whatever you feel like." Then the client wrinkled her nose disdainfully and complained, "Ugh, and why does it smell like fish here? This is supposed to be an atelier, not a market." Only then did Willa remember the groceries she had carelessly left on the floor and, apologising, picked them up and hurried to put them in the small fridge. When she returned, her boss was already soothing the disgruntled client. After all the client's wishes were recorded and she left, her boss turned to Willa. "I think you should go home today. Your mind is elsewhere. I hope you'll be more focused tomorrow, as our busy season is starting." Thanking her boss, Willa got home. Yes, she wasn't rushing to get there. It seemed easier to analyse everything she had seen without excess emotion in the cool air outside. A call from her sister came just as Willa was about to head to Barry's workplace to demand an explanation about his conversation with the blonde. Phoebe began congratulating her on the anniversary of meeting her husband and wishing her all the best. Suddenly, she paused. "Willa, why are you so quiet? Are you busy and only half listening to me?" Willa didn't hide her feelings. She told Phoebe about her suspicions of Barry's infidelity and her desire to confront him at his office. After a few seconds, her younger sister reasoned. "Honestly, I wouldn't act rashly if I were you. As you said, Barry was talking animatedly with that stranger, and she was fiddling with her smartphone. It seems to me that the situation is quite innocent. Not defending Barry, but for the sake of fairness, he might have asked that blonde for help setting up the smartphone he bought for you. A perfectly reasonable explanation, I think." "Oh, and setting up a smartphone can only be done in a cafe," Wilma remarked bitterly. "I understand your sarcasm, but maybe it was just a business meeting. The package might be similar, and the phone belongs to that blonde. I don't think it's worth tormenting yourself with suspicions and doubts. In any case, everything will become clear this evening. Dinner will set things straight. If I were you, I'd calmly head home, taking advantage of the spare time your considerate boss has given you. Take a bubble bath, do a face and hair mask, and all that. Anyway, taking care of yourself is never a bad idea." "Maybe you're right," Willa replied. "I'll do just that." After saying goodbye to her sister, she walked home more confidently. While the bath was filling, she marinated some fish steaks and put a bottle of sparkling wine, a gift from a satisfied client, in the fridge. Curiosity led her to check Barry's hiding spot. However, this only intensified her suspicions. The gift bag with its content was missing. Of course, there could be an entirely innocent and reasonable explanation for its disappearance, but Willa's festive mood vanished completely. Even a bath with her favourite products didn't help improve her mood. But as she cooked, Willa gradually relaxed. After all, everything would soon become clear. The aromas wafting through the kitchen were intoxicating, and the act of creation gave her a sense of control over her own life. Barry arrived home quite early, and, handing Willa a single red rose and a cosmetic set of shampoo and conditioner, clearly bought from the nearest chain store, washed his hands and sat down at the table. The woman barely suppressed a cry of disappointment at not receiving the smartphone. Still, she hoped it would turn out that he was just teasing her. However, he managed to surprise her again, and unpleasantly so. Seeing the trout and a bottle of Italian sparkling wine on the table, he raised an eyebrow in disapproval and, instead of congratulations, seriously asked, "Didn't we just talk about living more frugally? What is this extravagance? The trout is clearly not cheap, and the wine is obviously not from the lower price range. Where are the receipts, Willa? Let's write down your expenses right now so you don't forget anything. You're acting like a rich woman, and I always end up paying for everything." Willa was shocked, but did not remain silent, and retorted, "Remember, I earn money too, and quite well. I pay the utilities myself and don't ask you for money for cosmetics or other personal needs. Remind me, what do you pay for, Barry?" The man, pausing from his fish steak, calmly replied, "Who replaced the kitchen faucet? Dickens?" "Well, really," Willa laughed, though she didn't find it funny. "I must have reminded you about that faucet for half a year, if not more." "Well, you know I've been very busy." Barry tried to justify himself, sensing that his wife was genuinely angry, and attempted to placate her. "Thank you. Everything turned out delicious. All right, for the sake of the celebration, we can postpone keeping track of expenses. I admit now is not the time. Besides, I promised to help Mum, so I need to go." "But why today? Doesn't her mum know that today is our special day? She has some problems and I promised to stop by. I need to help her. You understand, Mum is sacred. As a good son, I must support her. I'll just put a couple of pieces of fish in a container and go pamper Mum." Willa was so taken aback that she even forgot to give her husband his gift. The package with the fishing lures remained in the drawer, with various kitchen odds and ends. Barry, transferring the remaining steaks from the pan to the container, grabbed the bottle of sparkling wine from the table, put everything in Willa's favourite shopper, which she had sewn herself, and headed for the hallway. The woman noted with growing displeasure that her husband didn't even feel like kissing her. From the door, Barry shouted back towards the kitchen. "Don't wait up for me. I probably won't be back soon. I'll have to stay at Mum's and go straight to work from there in the morning." "Of course, it will take time to treat your real beloved properly," Willa whispered, annoyed by her husband's hurried lies. The end of her family life seemed to be on the horizon. The evening had put everything in its place. So, she was not his beloved after all. It was not for her that he had prepared the expensive smartphone she had seen in the hands of a stranger that day. The most hurtful thing was not that Barry had betrayed the family, but that he had lied so skillfully and pretended so convincingly. Of course, she couldn't believe that Barry had gone to his mother's. There was no evidence to support this innocent version of his escape on their anniversary. On the contrary, everything pointed to him finding another woman, to whom he had gone with the carefully prepared treats from his wife. The blonde would surely thank him for the smartphone and then refresh herself with seafood and sparkling wine. Hearing the sound of the closing door and the elevator taking her husband away to his adventures, Willa called Phoebe and briefly explained the situation. "In short, divorce is creeping up on me and I had no idea. The situation is clear. Barry, under the pretext of visiting his mother, has rushed off to his mistress. I'm more than sure of it. You know, it's even funny now. He lectured me so thoroughly, even sternly, about being wasteful, but he didn't forget to take the non-cheap steaks and sparkling wine he had scolded me for. The smartphone, which I thought was an anniversary gift, had apparently already been given to the other woman, and I got a not-so-fresh flower, anti-dandruff shampoo, which I don't need, and conditioner." "Well, Willa, I don't even know what to say. Of course, you could call Mrs. Kearns or even visit her to get to the bottom of this," her sister said, uncertain. "But why, Phoebe? To hear more lies? I'm sure my mother-in-law will cover for her son and come up with some story. No, I don't want to see or hear her trying to squirm out of this." Phoebe objected. "Well, from what I know of your mother-in-law, she won't bother to make excuses. She'll probably go on the offensive, and you'll have to explain why her wonderful Barry slipped away from you on your anniversary." Willa smirked. Exactly, just like her son. "Accused me of being wasteful while entertaining himself on the side and throwing money around. It's unbelievable. He's demanding receipts from me, yet someone else is receiving a gift worth nearly a half of his salary or more." Although Willa's hope for a long and happy family life with Barry was shattered, she felt neither pain nor shock, and was even surprised when her sister offered to come over. "Why, Phoebe? There's no need. Believe me, I won't cry or do anything worse. There's no point in trying to keep Barry. We don't have children, and as we both know, children can't keep a man. Let him enjoy his blonde, and good luck to her in dealing with Mrs. Kearns." "Oh, darling, good for you for reacting this way. But if you start feeling down or lonely, call me, and I'll be over." "Thank you, Phoebe. I need some time alone. Besides, I won't be bored. I need to pack Barry's things and change the lock. I want him to understand that I won't forgive his betrayal." The sisters said their goodbyes, and Willa began packing her husband's belongings. She hadn't expected their anniversary evening to end with her clearing out his side of the closet. Methodically and calmly, filling Barry's gym bag and then large bags with his things, Willa regretted not taking the sparkling wine from the cheating jerk. A couple of sips would have made the process more enjoyable. The humiliating gift of cosmetics also went into one of the bags, along with shaving foam, a toothbrush, a razor, and Barry's personal towel. The rose, still lying on the kitchen table, was tossed into the trash. Willa dragged the filled bags to the door and suddenly remembered her plan to change the lock. In an hour later, a smiling thin man of indeterminate age quickly completed that job, accepted a few bills from Willa, and even offered to give her change, but she stopped him. "This is for your promptness and kindness." The man beamed and, deftly pocketing the bill, nodded towards the filled bags and offered, "If you need, I can take out the trash." Willa thanked the helpful man but declined, although for a moment she was tempted to throw out Barry's things in revenge. Throughout the next workday, she tried not to think about her husband, and her boss didn't ask unnecessary questions. During her lunch break, her sister called and offered to come over for moral support and to keep Barry in check if needed. Who knows what he might do out of spite, but Robert and I will keep him from doing anything stupid, and will support you too. But Willa declined. "I'll manage. Thanks for your concern, Phoebe." "All right, but if you need anything, call right away, and let me know when it's all over. I mean, when this jerk leaves." Willa promised to keep her sister updated, ending the call, immersed herself in work. She even skipped lunch to avoid staying late. She got home first and, sitting in the kitchen, heard the key turn in the lock. Barry couldn't open the door, of course. Without wasting time, he called Willa on the phone. The woman skipped and opened the door ajar, leaving it closed with a chain. "Hello, what's going on, Willa? I'm hungry, tired, dreaming of taking a bath and relaxing, and you're setting up some kind of quest for me. Are you hiding a lover or something?" The man chuckled and ordered, "All right, enough joking around. Let me in already, and heat up the dinner." Barry indeed looked tired, and Willa found it so amusing that she ironically pitied him. "Oh, poor thing, you spent so much money on a phone for your mistress, and she didn't even feed you. How ungrateful she is." Through the small gap, Willa noticed a momentary embarrassment flash across Barry's face, but he quickly regained his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. Is this really the time for jokes? Please open the door. I'm genuinely hungry and tired." "Wait, Barry. First, you'll listen to me calmly. I've packed all your things, and I'm asking you to take them quietly and without a scandal. I'm even willing to wait while you call a taxi to take everything away at once." "Have you lost your mind? Willa, this isn't funny. Open the door, I said. I don't know why you're angry, but I assure you you're mistaken. I'm completely innocent." "Barry, stop playing the innocent. You know, I wouldn't even be offended if you gave me a random set for our anniversary. Maybe you remembered it too late, or maybe you were embarrassed to return empty-handed, or maybe you couldn't think of anything suitable and decided to give a practical gift. But I know that yesterday, during your lunch break, you gave a costly smartphone to your mistress, and on the day of our anniversary, no less. I won't even mention that you ran off in the evening with the dishes I prepared. After such pettiness and shameless betrayal, I can't even stand to talk to you. So, either I open the door now, and you calmly take everything, or I'll start throwing your things out through this gap one by one. Or, as an option, I'll toss them off the balcony. Choose which option you prefer." "You're getting worked up, Willa. Let me in and we'll talk calmly." "There's nothing to talk about. You'll take your stuff and goodbye, as they say. The question is, how will you collect them? Will you pick them up from under the balcony, gather them one by one from the floor, or take them away quietly, peacefully and neatly in bags?" The man understood from Willa's tone that he couldn't change her mind at that moment, and meekly muttered, "I'll take everything in bags, open up." Willa let in her husband, whom she had already decided to relegate to the status of X, and nodded toward his belongings lined up along the corridor walls, now in a neat row, but in several layers. "Call a taxi, you can't carry all that in your hands." Looking Willa in the eye, Barry pleaded, "Come on, let's talk. You're kicking me out into nowhere." "That's not my problem, Barry. I can't think of a single reason why I should put up with you here. I repeat, take your things and go wherever you want." "I don't want to go anywhere. I'm fine right here." With a smug smile, Barry reached out to hug his wife, but she stretched out her arms in a warning gesture and advised, "You'd better call a taxi, or I'll call the police." "Actually, I'm your husband, and I have the right to live here," Barry brazenly declared, determined to stay in his wife's apartment at any cost and to persuade her to make up. He added, "And besides, I love you, among other things." However, the confession sounded completely unconvincing, and Willa advised, "For the last time, I'm asking you nicely, get out. Don't test my patience. Go to the one you gave the smartphone to. She's the one you love, while your faithful wife should be happy with a cheap shower set. Great plan. Why are you so fixated on that smartphone? Why do you think I don't have the right to give gifts? I earn my own money. I give my own gifts whoever I want." "Barry, enough! You ask me for receipts for grocery purchase, but it turns out you have the right to dispose of your income as you see fit. Very original, but unfair." Willa began kicking the nearest bag towards the exit with her foot, and Barry, blushing with anger, began dragging the bags out onto the landing one by one, simultaneously typing something on his smartphone. Watching the end of her love story, Willa didn't feel bitterness yet, and involuntarily compared herself to her mother. Her mother had it much worse, with daughters to care for and the pain of betrayal by a friend and husband. So it was easier for her to keep her composure and not show Barry how hurtful it was to waste 7 years. After finishing moving his things into the elevator, the man, without saying a word of farewell, squeezed into the cabin and went downstairs. After calling his sister to report on how the breakup went, Willa headed to the kitchen. She drank tea without tasting it and watched some comedy show on her laptop without understanding the jokes. Willa felt empty inside, with no thoughts in her head. An hour after Barry left, her mother-in-law called her and began to complain. "What have you come up with? Why did you kick Barry out? For being a good son and helping me?" "No, Mrs. Kearns, I kicked Barry out for being a bad husband." "Willa, you're wrong. If a man helps his mother, there's no reason to throw him out like a misbehaving cat. I don't know what you've imagined, but yesterday Barry came to my place in the evening because I needed to replace the water filter, which required disassembling half the kitchen cabinet. It was very inconvenient and very time-consuming. Then I fed my son. He lay down to rest after dinner and slept until morning. So it's my fault that Barry didn't return to you yesterday, and you overreacted and kicked him out. Isn't that unfair?" Until Mrs. Kearns started defending her son so persistently, Willa hadn't considered catching her in a lie. But, growing angry, she asked her mother-in-law a provocative question. "By the way, did Barry bring you the fruit drink and dumplings with the new recipe yesterday? How did you like them?" Mrs. Kearns, unsuspecting of the trap, began praising her daughter-in-law's culinary skills. "Delicious, Wilma. Everything was just right. The seasoning, the salt. The fruit drink was also wonderful. Will you share the recipe sometime, if it's not some big secret?" After her mother-in-law's slip, Willa was convinced that Barry hadn't visited his mother with the fish steaks and sparkling wine the night before, and Mrs. Kearns was clumsily covering for her son. Barry's muffled whisper could be heard from the speaker. The man had apparently overheard part of the conversation and realised that his mother had slipped up, implicating him as well. Her mother-in-law began to make awkward excuses. "Oh, well, I must have misheard you and got everything mixed up. Barry did bring the fish." As if sharing its owner's indignation, Willa's smartphone screen flickered, went dark, and then the device began to reboot. The woman sighed. "Now my without 5 minutes ex-mother-in-law will think I hung up on her on purpose or out of spite." However, Willa didn't call back or apologise. Let her son talk to his mother. She had no time for this waste. She needed to fill the shelves emptied of Barry's things, so they wouldn't bother her with their gaping void. The phone finished rebooting, and almost immediately Barry called. Mrs. Kearns was apparently not nearby, and the man's voice was loud and irritated. "Well, are you happy now? You caught my mother in a lie?" "Barry, don't blame me for your inability to lie convincingly." "Don't blame me for not coordinating your story with your mother that could plausibly cover your escapades. That's not my fault at all." "It's still unfair to set traps for my mother," Barry protested. But Willa quickly retorted. "Says the man who gave a smartphone to another woman on the anniversary of our meeting. Receiving a set of cheap cosmetics on this special day, knowing another woman is happily exploring a smartphone. That's what I call unfair. Anyway, I don't want to talk or even think about this situation. Please, for the sake of all the good times we had, let's not ruin our past with arguments and mutual recriminations." Barry seemed taken aback by Willa's meek request, perhaps expecting more accusations. "Fine. No use arguing now. By the way, I want to take the table on the balcony and the sofa." "No problem, Barry. Just let me know when you're coming to pick them up." Mumbling something incomprehensible, Barry ended the call. Only after this conversation did Willa feel sad. The man she had considered her rock, who had proven reliable in difficult times, had turned out to be like many others. However, she didn't have an opportunity to dwell on her husband's treachery or the deceitfulness of men in general as the doorbell rang. Her younger sister had rushed to her aid. Behind Phoebe stood Robert, who clearly felt improper. "Come in," Willa welcomed them, although she wasn't sure she wanted company, even from close relatives. Phoebe ordered her companion, "Robert, take the bags to the kitchen and then you can go. If possible, pick me up tomorrow morning to take me to work." "Got it," Robert jokingly saluted. Quickly completing Phoebe's task, he left the apartment. "Don't worry, Willa. Luck will smile on us," Phoebe said, hugging her older sister. "I'm not worried, just disappointed. I get it. I don't know what's easier to bear, a husband's betrayal or a loved one who's in no hurry to marry. It's disappointing. What are men looking for? Do they always seek something or someone better for themselves?" The question hung in the air, because the answer was no easier to find than understanding what women want. About 2 weeks had passed since Willa kicked Barry out. He hadn't shown up or even called to take the table and the sofa. Then one day, Mrs. Kearns entered the atelier. She politely greeted everyone, and seeing that Willa was not busy with clients, almost rushed to hug her and asked, "Let's go outside and talk calmly." Willa's boss nodded to her, allowing her to leave her workstation. Once outside, both women stood in silence, watching the large snowflakes swirl around them. Mrs. Kearns clearly struggled to find the right words to start the conversation, so she began from afar. "Busy at work?" she asked. "Yes, it's the busiest time of the year. Everyone wants to look their best for the holidays, and many are preparing for corporate events." The mother-in-law expressed her concern. "Oh, Willa, you're not taking care of yourself. You need to rest too." Willa couldn't think of a response and waited for the woman to get to the point. "Willa, please forgive my foolish Barry. You must understand that any man can make a mistake, even the most faithful. Barry is staying with me now and he looks terrible. He's made a mess of things and regrets it deeply." Willa replied, "I understand your desire to reconcile us, but our family is broken. I don't know what version of events he told you, but believe me, I had a perfect reason to leave him." The mother-in-law smiled gently. "Willa, in a marriage you need to be flexible and navigate around sharp corners. It's important to preserve love. It's always easier to break something than to build it. Barry is not a bad man." "If he were, I wouldn't have married him," Wilma interrupted her, "and I wouldn't have trusted him blindly for 6 years." "But look," the mother-in-law continued, shifting to a moral offensive, "look at the surrounding beauty. Even our gloomy city is transformed. In the evening, the illuminations will be turned on and everything will become magical. The holidays are approaching. New Year, Christmas. Why refuse to do a good deed and forgive Barry?" "Am I supposed to be Santa Claus, granting wishes?" Willa exclaimed in indignation. "This is not my problem that Barry didn't think about the consequences of his betrayal. I'm hurting too." "But Willa, think about Barry. You've lived together for so many years. Doesn't it bother you that he's spending most of his time on the couch, drinking litres of beer every evening? Talk to him like a close friend, help him relax and feel human again." "You know what? I'm tired of convincing you that my relationship with Barry is over. Let that blonde he gave the expensive smartphone to take care of him and drink tea with him." At these words, Mrs. Kearns snapped. "Oh, that blonde bimbo is a selfish, arrogant and rude gold digger. She thinks the world revolves around her and sees Barry as nothing more than an ATM. She's lazy, has no decent education, and occasionally works as a promoter, dreaming of becoming an actress at 24, as if the film industry is waiting for her. She's not even from here and rents an apartment with a friend." Listening to the list of the other woman's flaws, Willa realised that Mrs. Kearns' true motive for wanting reconciliation was not just concern for her son, but also the discomfort of sharing her apartment with him and the prospect of a new daughter-in-law. "Oh, now I understand you and your motives better. You just want to get rid of Barry because your apartment is too crowded, and you don't want that woman as your daughter-in-law. You want to shoulder him on me again." "Why so harsh? I just want to save my son from that predator, and you must help me." Willa was saved from having to listen to more demands disguised as wishes by her boss, who poked her head out of the atelier door and said, "Excuse me, but we're still open. A client will be arriving soon." Mrs. Kearns wanted to say more, but left, biting her lip. The beautiful winter cityscape no longer brought her joy. Her daughter-in-law, whom she had thought naive and simple, had shown unexpected strength of character. Even her principled stance seemed trivial compared to the brazen audacity of her son's new girlfriend. A few days before New Year, Barry visited Wilma to collect his remaining belongings after calling ahead. He handed her a small package without looking her in the eye and said, "Here, to replace your old smartphone. It's not a flagship model, but it's good and reliable." "Thank you, Barry, but I have already bought myself a very nice smartphone. And if you think this phone will make me forgive you and change my mind about the divorce, you are terribly wrong. Wake up, dear. I am not going to forgive infidelity. Good luck." Barry took his things and left Wilma's apartment for good. Their divorce was finalised without issues, and whenever they encountered each other in the city, Willa felt neither resentment nor sadness. She believed her happiness was still ahead. And it came true. At her sister's wedding with her long-time partner Robert, Willa met a man and married him.